Welcome to part 5 and the final part of this Blender tutorial series where we're creating this moon lander. If you haven't seen the previous parts, then definitely check out the tutorial playlist linked in the video description. So in this part, we're going to be creating the moon rocks and the moon environment, and we're going to do the rendering and the compositing. Now before we start this part, I want to let you know about my rock generator created with geometry nodes. So it's a geometry nodes modifier setup, which you can add to object, and it generates customizable rocks. So there's a procedural rock material, you can use that to change the look of the rocks, and the geometry nodes modifier setup also comes with many different customizable values to change the size and shape of the rocks. There's also some different rock materials which comes with the product. So if you're interested in purchasing, then I'll have the links in the video description, or if you want to learn how to create the rock generator yourself, then you can watch the tutorial, link is in the description. Now I'm not actually going to be using that rock generator in this tutorial, I'm going to be using a built-in rock generator which is in Blender. So if you just open up Blender's user preferences, you can go here to the get extensions and search for extra and just add the extra mesh object. So just enable that extension. And we're going to be using that to create the rocks. So if I go to the add menu, I'll go here to mesh, and I can go here to extras, and I can add this rock generator. So Blender actually has kind of this cool built-in rock generator. Now I'm going to delete this rock because I'm not actually going to be using it yet. What I first want to do is create a basic kind of rig setup so that I can kind of pose the solar panels. So what I want to do is apply the mirror modifier for all of these objects. So I'm going to select this object here and then click on the drop down and apply the mirror modifier. Let's click on this one here and apply the mirror modifier. This one here, apply the mirror, and then also this one here, apply the mirror modifier for those 4 objects. So now if I select all these 4 objects and go into edit mode, you can see there's topology on each side. So let's go into wireframe, and I'm going to box select one side, and we're going to separate by selection. So now we can just create kind of a basic rigging setup. So I want to be able to like rotate this from that hinge. So what I'm going to do is go into edit mode of this object. We're going to go to the face select and select these 2 faces, and I'll hit Shift S, cursor to selected, and now if I go back to object mode, I can select this piece here, and I'll go object, set origin, and we're going to set the origin to the 3D cursor. So now if I try to rotate this on the y-axis, it can rotate up and down like that. So let's do kind of the same thing here. So what I'm going to do is go into edit mode, we're going to select this piece, and then shift select that piece. Shift S, cursor to selected, and then we're going to click on object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor, so I can rotate this on the y-axis. So we'll select this piece and then shift select this piece, Control P to parent it, and we're going to set parent to object, keep transform. So this way, now if I rotate this piece, the other object is going to move along with it. So we'll select this object, shift select this object, Control P, set parent to object, keep transform. So I can now rotate this object and it's going to rotate with it. So now we can just kind of pose this. So let's rotate this up like that. And then select this and rotate it down along the y-axis like that. Just so it's a little bit more compact. So now we just need to do basically the same exact thing for the other side. So we'll go over here to the other side, go into edit mode. We'll select this face and this face, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then what we want to do is select the beam and then click on object, set origin to 3D cursor. So now we can rotate this and it will rotate up and down like that. So now we'll select this object, go into edit mode, and we're going to select these 2 faces, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then object, set origin to 3D cursor. So we'll select this, shift select this object, Control P to object, keep transform, and then this object is going to be parented to this object. Control P, keep transform. So now I can select the beam and I can rotate this on the Y to bring it up. And then I can select this piece here and rotate it on the Y to kind of bring that down. You can just kind of make each one look a little bit different. So just like that. So now we have kind of those solar panels which are more compacted, so they're not kind of coming out quite as much. So now I want to organize the scene a bit. So this collection here, I'm going to double click on this collection and I'm going to call this lander. And then if I select both of these lights here, we're going to select both of them and we're going to hit move. So M for move. We're going to click on new collection and we're going to call this lights and then click on create. So now we have an extra collection for the lights. So let's now hide both of these collections. We're going to right click, click on new collection, and this collection I can call rocks. So let's now go to the add menu and I'm going to go to mesh. We'll go to extras and we're going to add the rock generator. And I'll zoom into this rock. Now, if you click right behind me on the rock settings, you could play around with a bunch of the rock settings, but what I'm going to do is just turn the number of rocks up to 5, and then I can click on each rock and just kind of drag it away. So we have now 5 different random rocks. Now what I want to do is apply all the modifiers, because if I take a look at these, you can see there's a lot of modifiers like displacements and things, and so that's way too detailed to add all these rocks onto a giant surface. So what I'll do is hit Control A, and I'll do the visual geometry to mesh. So now if we go into edit mode of these rocks, they still are pretty detailed. So what I'm going to do is select one of these rocks. We're going to add modifier and add the decimate modifier, and we can take this ratio and just turn it way down, and that is going to make the rock way less detailed. So I'll make it really small, maybe like a 0.1, and then before we apply this, I want to shift select all the other rocks, and then lastly select the one with the decimate, and we'll use Control L, and we're going to copy modifiers. So they're all low poly rocks. Then if we select all the rocks, just hit Control A and do visual geometry to mesh. So in edit mode now, you can see that they're all really low poly. So now I want to add a material to these rocks, and I'm going to be adding my procedural moon surface material. So I already made a tutorial on how to create that, so you can go over and watch that video with the link in the video description, and then you can import it into your project, or you can purchase the procedural material on my government Patreon, and that's a great way to help support the channel. Or if you have my ultimate Blender procedural material pack, you can just add it into the project really easily. So if I just click over here to go to the assets tab, I have my ultimate procedural material pack right here in the asset library. So I can just type in moon, and then here we go, the moon surface material. So I'm just going to drag and drop it onto this rock here, and then I can go back here to the layout. Now if you don't have my ultimate material pack and you just want to import it from a other Blender file, then you can click on File and then click on Append. Then you can just locate to the Blender file where you have the moon surface material, and I'm just going to go inside the Blender file. You can go into the material and then select the moon surface, and then you'd click on the Append button. And then from the material dropdown, you can just add the moon surface. So we'll select all the rocks, and lastly select this one with the moon surface. Control L, and we're going to link the materials. So let's go into the rendered view, and let's turn on the lights collection so we can see the lights. So let's go here to the shading workspace, and I'll go into the rendered view so we can see how this is looking. Now, in the tutorial, I showed you how to create different variations, and the one that I'm going to be using is the Minkowski F2. So if you click on this material output, that is going to use this one. So now what I can do is just select the others and hit X to delete them. So just delete those. We're just going to be using this moon surface Minkowski F2. I do want to change a few of the settings though, so let's take the displacement and turn that to 0 so it's not using any displacement. The bump strength, I'll turn this up more to like a 0.25 so it's a little bit more bumpy, and then the scale, I'll turn this down to like a 0.3. So that's looking a bit better for the moon rocks. So let's go back here to the layout, and we'll go back to solid view, and now I can just minimize the rocks here and just hide the rocks. So I'm now going to be creating another object, and that's going to be the environment on the ground. So we'll center the 3D cursor, and we need to turn on an add-on for this, so go to Edit, Preferences, and then on the Extensions tab, you can type in Land, and you can add the ANT landscape add-on. So add that here in the extensions, and then you can close the user preferences. So if you go to the add menu and you go to mesh, you can now add this landscape. So it's a really cool built-in add-on for Blender. Now there's a bunch of different settings that you can play around with the landscape, but I'm just going to close this, and instead I'll go into edit mode, scale it way up, and then scale it down on the Z-axis, just like that, and maybe rotate that over and bring it back. So if we go to front view, you can see the landscape is kind of in the background, but then right here, it's more flat. So now let's hit M to move. We'll go new collection. We can just call this ground, and then click on create. So we've now added it into its own collection. So if we want to hide it, we can just easily just hide that there. So let's turn on the lander. So now we have the lander, the lights, and the ground all on. And what I want to do is go into edit mode, scale it up way bigger because it should be quite a bit bigger. All right, and maybe bring it down a little bit like that. Bring it back. And what I want to do is kind of flatten the spot where the lander is on. So let's just go into edit mode. We're just going to box select this spot here. And let's click on this button here to turn on proportional editing. So we're now going to scale everything, and we're going to scale everything on the Z-axis. Let's scroll the mouse wheel to change the size of proportional editing, and I'll type 0 and then enter. And we could also bring everything down maybe on the Z-axis, scale it by 0 and then enter. So that way this little spot here is going to be nice and flat. So we can bring it up on the Z-axis and just place the lander right there. So it's sitting on the ground. All right, that's pretty good. And then we can kind of rotate this. Let's also add a camera. So I'll go to the add menu, we'll add a camera, and I'll just move my camera to about here and hit Control-Alt-0 to bring the camera to our view. And I'm just going to rotate the camera and stick the camera right over here. I do have a tutorial on how to use the camera, and I show you kind of like navigation to kind of move the camera in and out. If you want to check out that video, the link will be in the description. Now for this camera, I'm going to put it into the lights collection because that just kind of makes sense. Now you could go to the object data properties and change like the focal length of the camera. So if you make it really high, things look a bit more flat, or if you turn it like way down and then zoom in, you can see things look more fisheyed. I'm just going to leave it at the default of 50. And if I click here to go to the render properties, actually the output properties, what I want to do is make the resolution 1920 by 1920. So that way it's going to be a square image. And I can rotate this, kind of zoom it in here. All right, let's go into the rendered viewport mode to see how this is looking. And there's the lander looking very cool. I might want to take the sunlight and maybe rotate the sunlight down a little bit. Something like that's pretty cool. And then we also have this light here just kind of as a bounce light. Also in the cycles render, in the camera, you can hit Control B and just add a boundary around the camera. So it's only gonna render in the viewport what the camera can see to kind of speed up the viewport preview. So we'll just stick that right there. So now we'll select the ground here and let's go to the materials, and we're going to add the moon surface material. So we're going to add the same material. But what I want to do is go to the shading workspace, and I want to duplicate this material so we can change some of the settings. So I will click on this button here to duplicate this. Let's just call this ground. And then if I click on this little 2 icon, that's going to duplicate the node group, and I can call this ground. So now we can change a few of the settings, like for example, we can change the scale. Let's first just hit Control A and apply the scale to make sure the scale is applied of the ground. So what I'm going to do is turn the scale to a 0.05, so that's quite a bit smaller. And then I'm going to turn the bump strength to a 0.13, just a 0.13, so it's a little bit more smooth. And then also we have this hills height, and this hills height is going to add a bit more bump, so I'm going to turn the hills height to 2. Now what I can do is go into edit mode, and I can turn on proportional editing. So let's do this in the layout. It's easier to do in the layout, and we'll go back to solid view, and I can just like select some of the spots of the landscape and hit G to grab and just kind of move the landscape around. So go into the camera view and just kind of see how this is looking. So maybe some parts of the landscape you could pull farther back or away. Some parts you could maybe bring down a little bit so it's a bit more kind of smooth there on the back. So something like that, and just make sure it looks good from the camera's view. So just make whatever cool background you want for the background. So something like that. So there's kind of like a hill there and then another hill there. So that's looking pretty cool. I do need to select the ground though, and now just bring it down so it's not going through the lander. And one more thing that I want to do is this scale here. I think I could turn the scale up a little bit. So maybe I'll just turn it to like a 0.1 instead. That might look a little bit better. I think 0.1 is better. So now we're going to use geometry nodes to place the rocks on the ground. So let's click here to go to geometry nodes and make sure you have the land selected. We'll click on new to add geometry nodes, and we're just going to make a very basic geometry node setup to put the rocks on the ground. So to create this, we're going to use the distribute points on faces, drop this here, and then we're going to search for instance on points. So instance on points. So by using the distribute points on faces, we're actually creating little points on all the faces of the mesh. And that's why if I just put the points into the geometry, you can see each one of those little dots are random points that it's creating. Now let's turn the density down to like a 0.1 so that there's not as many rocks, because that's going to be way too many rocks and it's going to lag the scene. So let's turn to 0.1. Now the instance on points is telling geometry nodes that we're going to instance something, so something is going to be replaced for each one of those points. So wherever a point is, that's where a rock is going to be. So what I can do is now search for collection info, and this is going to give us the rock data, and we want the instance to be going into the instance. And so now here on the collection, we can choose the rocks collection. Now you can see all the rocks are all lined up. So that is because they are all in the collection lined up like that. So what we need to do is reset children, separate children, and pick instance. And this way it's going to pick a random object from the rock collection. Now the ground is disappeared. That's because we need to add the join geometry, put it here after the instance on points. And we want to take the original geometry, which is this object here in edit mode. You can see we actually have that mesh still. So we want to put the original geometry back into the join geometry. So now we have the original mesh. So we can go into the camera view and go into the rendered view and kind of see how this is looking. So now there's definitely some problems. All the rocks are kind of pointed in like the same directions. So what I'm going to do is search for the random value node. And you can see on the instance on points, we have rotation values to rotate the rocks and scale values. So first, let's put this random value into the scale. So this way, each rock is going to randomly have generated values between 1 and 0. And so now I can just change these values. So maybe we'll make all the rocks smaller. So maybe a maximum of 0.6 and a minimum of 0.2. So some rocks are bigger and some rocks are smaller. And then also here on the distribute points on faces, we could turn the density up maybe to like a 0.2. So there's a bit more rocks. Now I also want a random rotation. So to do this, we're going to search for another random value node. Let's drop this here, but from the float, we're going to change this to vector, and this way it's going to break up the x, y, and z values. So that way, if we put the value into the rotation, we now have an x value and a y value and a z value to rotate them all around, each on their own axis. Now I want to rotate them all together, so I want to rotate all the rocks randomly by all the axes. So what I'm going to do is type in TAU for tau. So that's in a math equation which creates this number, which will make sure it rotates all the rocks around randomly. You could also just turn it up to like a giant number like 1,000, and that will just randomize the rocks. Now what I also want to do is move all the rocks down slightly into the ground. So to do this, we're going to search for the transform geometry. Now I don't want to put the transform geometry after the join geometry, because if I do that, that's going to move the landscape down as well. I just want to put it after the instance on points. So stick it there. And this way we now have this translation z, and if I move this up and down, that's going to move the rocks up and down. So I'm just going to drag the rocks slightly down, so drag them down into the negative values, so maybe like a negative 0.1. So you can see here it is before and after, so the rocks are just slightly smaller and pushed down into the mesh. So I think that looks a lot better. So now what I want to do is take this entire setup here, so all of these nodes here, but not the join geometry and not the input and the output, and I'm going to press Control-Shift-D. So Control-Shift-D will duplicate the nodes but keep the wires plugged up, and I'm going to take this transform geometry and put that into the join geometry. So this way we have like a group of rocks here and a group of rocks here. Now for this one, it's the same exact setup. So what I can do is just take this seed value and I can turn the seed value to 1. And this way it's going to move the rocks to a different location, because if the seed values are both turned to 0, you can see there's 2 rocks on top of each other, so it looks really dark. So if I turn the seed to 1, that's just going to give a random seed value. So now there's more rocks. However, I want these rocks to be a lot smaller. So let's zoom in here, and I'm going to turn this minimum to maybe a 0.1, and let's turn the maximum to maybe like a 0.3. And then we can also turn the density up to maybe like a 0.3 or maybe even like a 0.5. So there's a lot more rocks. And also on the transform geometry, if we just kind of get rid of that, you can see the rocks are much more visible. So what I'm going to do is just turn this value to a negative 0.03. So the rocks are still going down into the ground, but not quite as much. So now there's just a bunch of moon rocks all along the environment. So that's it for the geometry node setup, so we can just go back here to the layout. Now, if it's kind of laggy in your scene, you can see as I move this around, it's kind of laggy. What I'm going to do is go to the modifier properties, and you can select the landscape, and I'm going to click on this monitor icon, and that's just going to hide the rocks. So the rocks are still there, they'll show up in the render, but you just can't see them in the viewport, and that'll speed up the viewport render. So we're almost ready to render the scene. What I want to do is add a depth of field. So I'm going to click to place the 3D cursor right here, and then I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add an empty, and I'll just scale the empty down. So now if we click on the camera, we can go to the camera data properties, and we'll scroll down. We're going to add depth of field. On the focus object here, we can start to type in empty and just choose the empty object. And then what I like to do is go into the rendered view, and I like to turn the f-stop all the way down to 0, and that way it's like too strong, but then I can just click here on the arrows to turn up more and more to just get it to a f-stop value that I like. So I think maybe turning it to like a 2 is probably pretty good, or maybe I can turn it down to like a 1.5. So you can see the background is blurred, but then the lander is all in focus. So I'm going to leave the f-stop at a 1.5. Let's go over to the render properties. So let's go up here to the render. We're going to open up the sampling, and I'm going to use 200 samples, so just 200, and then I'm also going to turn on the denoise. Now, one more thing that I want to do is add some stars in the background, so let's go to the shading workspace, and instead of using the object nodes, we're going to change this to the world nodes, and we'll click on new to add a new world. So then what I want to do to create the stars is add a Voronoi texture. Let's put the distance into the color. I'm going to turn the strength up to maybe like a 50, so it's a bit brighter, and then what I want to do is change the scale to like a 100, and it's still way too blown out, so we can't really see the Voronoi texture. So to fix this, I can just add a color ramp and put it here after the Voronoi, and then what I can do is flip these two tabs, so it's actually going to be mostly black, and there we go. Now you can just see those little stars. So let's just drag the black tab down here really close, so the stars are going to be very small. And then also if you change this bottom value to Minkowski, that'll make the stars look a little bit more kind of like a star shape, so they almost look like they're going to be twinkling. So I kind of like that better. You can see if I make it bigger, it's kind of hard to see in this shot, but if I made the scale smaller, you could see the Minkowski. So it kind of has sharp edges. Let's go into the camera view, kind of see how that's looking. So if I zoom in, you can see there are the little stars showing up. And then of course you can change the lighting. If I go back here to the layout, if you want to like change the lighting, you could. So you can kind of rotate the angle of the light. You could also add maybe like a planted flag, that would be pretty cool, or some astronauts, or maybe even like a moon base in the background. So many more things you could do with this. I might even turn the strength of the sun up just a little bit more, so maybe turn it up to like a 16, although I don't want to turn it up too high because I don't want to kind of blow out the reflections. But maybe if I just kind of rotate the sun more at an angle, there's more of like sharp shadows there. That does look kind of cool. Maybe I'll turn the sunlight brightness down a little bit because I don't want it to be too bright. So just save the project again, and then you can click on render and you can render the final image. All right, so the render is finished. So I'm gonna jump over to Blender's Compositor, and I'm just gonna close this window. That's just, I use that to see the real-time viewport render or the viewport compositing. I'm gonna click on use nodes. Let's Control Shift select the render layers, and I'll Shift right click and drag over this wire to add a reroute. So I thought it would be cool to add like a bit of a vignette. So what I'm going to do is search for the box mask, and let's make this bigger, and I can change the width and the height of the box mask just like that. So I'll change the width and the height to the same value so that we have that box there. We can now blur it by adding this blur. Let's put the mask into the image, and I can preview the blur, and I'll start by turning it maybe to like a 300. Now if I hit the N key to open the side panel, what I want to do is use my GPU. So if I click here on options, I'm going to use the GPU compositing, and that way it'll do the compositing a lot faster. Let's maybe turn this up to like a 400, and then I'm just going to add an alpha over to mix in the blur. So I'll stick this here, and let's just preview the reroute there, and I can put the blur into the factor, and this image can go into the bottom one, and then here on the top image we'll make this fully black. And then I might want to take the box mask and just make it a little bit smaller, because right now I think it's a little bit too big. So make it a little bit smaller. We can also take the blur and make it even bigger, maybe even to like a 600, so it's even more blurred. So now we just have a subtle vignette around the image. Now let's also search for the glare node, and we'll drop the glare node here after the render layers. And on the glare type, we'll change this to bloom, and I'm going to turn the medium to high quality. And then we can take the strength and just turn it way down, and maybe also turn the size down a little bit so it's a bit smaller. Turn the strength even more down because I really don't want it to be too blown out, but just a subtle glare will look kind of cool. And then finally, after the alpha over, we can add a lens distortion. So we'll drop the lens distortion here. Let's preview the reroute again. And then on the dispersion, let's start with like a 0.01, maybe even a 0.04. That's a little bit too strong, maybe a 0.02. So lens distortion is a very cool sci-fi effect. So you can see it kind of adds kind of that like pulling there and that distortion of colors there on the edges. So let's save the image. So I'll hit F11. We can click on render result and type in viewer and add the viewer node. And then we can click on image and save the image. And just save the image in your files. So I'll just save the project again, and that's it for this tutorial series on how to create this Sci-Fi Lunar Lander. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial series. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel, you can purchase the finished tutorial project files on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, so the links to that are in the description. And joining one of my Patreon memberships is a great way to help support the channel, because you'll be helping to support the channel each month, and you'll get access to lots of Blender content, like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content on my Patreon page. So thank you everyone so much for your support. All of you supporters on Patreon really do help to make these free videos possible. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a future tutorial.